I stared at the navigation display, watching the blue-green marble of PX-41 rotate slowly beneath us. From up here, it looked almost exactly like Earth. Same cloud patterns, same ocean-to-land ratio, even similar polar ice caps. Made sense why the long-range surveys flagged it as potentially habitable. Hell, it was more than habitable. It was practically a twin. "Ground team, this is Argo. You're looking good for descent," I said into my headset, tracking the shuttle's trajectory on my screen. Lieutenant Ramirez was piloting, with Dr. Hansen and Dr. Richter strapped in behind her, probably going over their equipment checklists for the 100th time. "Copy that, Argo." Ramirez's voice came back crisp and professional. "Beginning final approach to landing zone Alpha. Weather looks clear, no atmospheric disturbances." Captain Holden stood behind my station, hands clasped behind his back in that way he did when he was trying to look calm, but was actually wound tight as a spring. This was our first real shot at studying what might be alien technology. The orbital scans had picked up some kind of artificial structures that didn't match any known geological formations. "Touchdown in 30 seconds, Ramirez reported. Through the comm, I could hear the shuttle's engines cycling down. "Landing zone is stable. Beginning equipment deployment." I pulled up the surface telemetry on my secondary screen. Everything looked normal. Atmospheric composition was breathable, gravity was 0.97 Earth standard, temperature was a comfortable 22 degrees Celsius. If I didn't know better, I'd think they were landing in some remote part of Montana. "Argo, we're on the ground and setting up the perimeter," Ramirez said. "Docs are already getting excited about something they spotted on the ridgeline." Dr. Hansen's voice cut in, slightly breathless with enthusiasm. "Skylar, you should see this. The structures we detected from orbit. They're definitely artificial. Geometric patterns that don't occur naturally. We're moving in for a closer look." Captain Holden leaned over my shoulder. "Keep monitoring their vitals and position. I want constant updates." "Yes, sir." I switched to the biomonitor display. 3 green dots showed healthy heart rates and oxygen levels. Dr. Richter's pulse was elevated, but that was normal for him when he got excited about new data. 20 minutes passed with routine check-ins. The team was documenting everything, taking samples, running preliminary scans. Dr. Hansen kept talking about crystalline formations that seemed to pulse with their own internal light. Dr. Richter was getting weird energy readings that didn't match anything in his databases. Then Ramirez's voice came through, different somehow. Tighter. "Getting strange readings down here. No life signs on the instruments, but it feels like something's watching us." I frowned at my console. The ship's sensors were picking up some kind of electromagnetic interference that hadn't been there before. The readings kept shifting, like something was moving around down there, but not showing up on any of our detection equipment. "Can you be more specific about those readings?" Captain Holden asked, moving closer to the comm station. "It's hard to explain." Dr. Richter's voice joined the conversation. "The energy signatures are unlike anything I've seen, almost like they're phasing in and out of our dimensional space." Dr. Hansen's excited voice cut through the static. "We found something. Some kind of translucent barrier or bubble. It's about 3 meters across and shimmering with energy patterns. The surface seems to ripple when we get close." I checked their position on my screen. They'd moved about half a kilometer from the landing site, following what looked like a path between the strange structures. Their bio readings were still normal, though everyone's heart rate had picked up. "Recommend maintaining safe distance until we can analyze the energy output," Captain Holden said into his headset. "Copy that, but you really need to see this," Dr. Hansen replied. "The patterns are definitely artificial. This is proof of non-human intelligence." For the next few minutes, their voices carried a mix of scientific excitement and professional caution. They were documenting everything, taking readings, trying to understand what they'd stumbled across. Dr. Richter kept muttering about energy frequencies that shouldn't be possible. Then everything went wrong. Ramirez's voice exploded through the comm, raw with terror. "Something's got me. I can't see it, but something's dragging me toward the..." Her words cut off in a scream that made my blood freeze. "Ramirez! Report!" Captain Holden barked into his headset. Dr. Hansen's panicked breathing filled the channel. "They're invisible! Something's here, but we can't see them! They're all around us!" I watched the biomonitors in horror as Ramirez's vital signs spiked into the red zone, then started fluctuating wildly. Dr. Hansen's readings were doing the same thing. "Ground team, get back to the shuttle now," Captain Holden ordered. Dr. Richter's voice came through one last time, strangely calm despite the chaos around him. "This world is not yours." Then all three biomonitors flatlined. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos. Captain Holden was shouting orders while I frantically tried to re-establish contact. The comm channels were dead, not even static, just empty silence that felt worse than any alarm. "Sir, I'm not getting any response," I reported, my fingers flying over the controls. "All biosigns are negative. Communication array shows no signal from their equipment." Captain Holden's face had gone pale, but his voice stayed steady. "Prep a second shuttle. Full tactical gear. We're going down there." I stared at the peaceful image of PX-41 on my screen. From up here, it still looked like paradise. But somewhere down there, 3 people had just died screaming about invisible attackers, and Dr. Richter's final words kept echoing in my head like a warning we should have heeded before we ever set foot on this world. The energy blast hit us without warning. 1 second I was staring at PX-41's peaceful surface, trying to process what had just happened to the ground team. The next, every alarm on the bridge was screaming, and the main display exploded in a shower of sparks that sent me diving behind my console. "What the hell was that?" Captain Holden shouted over the chaos. I pulled myself up, blinking away the afterimages burned into my retinas. The navigation array was completely fried. Smoke poured from the housing, and half the readouts showed nothing but static. Some kind of energy discharge from the planet's surface, massive electromagnetic pulse. The bridge lights flickered and died, plunging us into the red glow of emergency power. More explosions echoed through the ship as systems overloaded throughout the vessel. The steady hum of the engines stuttered and went silent. "Damage report," Holden barked into his comm unit. Yuri's voice crackled back through heavy static. "Engineering here. Main power grid is completely shot. I've got fires on decks 3 and 5, and the primary reactor is in emergency shutdown. We're running on backup, power only." I frantically tried to bring up ship diagnostics on my secondary console. What I saw made my stomach drop. "Sir, we've lost communication array, navigation, and main propulsion. Hull breaches detected in Section 7 and 12. The ship shuddered as emergency bulkheads slammed shut, sealing off the damaged areas. Through the comm system, I could hear panicked voices calling for medical assistance and reporting trapped crew members. Connor's voice cut through the noise. "Medical emergency on Deck 4, multiple casualties from console explosions. Jean and I are responding, but we need more hands down here." Captain Holden's face had gone pale in the emergency lighting. "How many casualties?" "Still counting, sir. At least 15 injured, and I'm getting reports of crew members missing in the sealed sections." I kept working on the diagnostics, hoping the numbers would somehow get better. They didn't. "Captain, life support is failing. Oxygen recyclers took heavy damage and atmospheric processors are offline. We're breathing what's left in the tanks." "How long do we have?" I ran the calculations twice, hoping I'd made an error. "With current crew complement, maybe 4 days if we're lucky." Holden stared at the dead main screen where PX-41 had been displayed moments before. "Can we reach escape velocity?" "Negative. Main engines are down and we don't have enough thruster power to break orbit. We're stuck here." For the next 3 hours, damage reports kept flooding in. The energy blast had been surgical in its precision. It took out every system we needed to survive or escape, while leaving just enough power to keep us alive long enough to suffer. 31 crew members were confirmed dead, either from the initial blast or trapped in sections we couldn't reach. 8 more were in critical condition. I rerouted what little power we had to essential systems, trying to squeeze every extra minute out of our failing life support. The ship felt different now. smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in. Every breath reminded me that we were using up our finite supply of air. Captain Holden stood behind my station, reading over my shoulder as I compiled the final damage assessment. His hands shook slightly as he held the tablet, and when he spoke, his voice sounded hollow. 23 survivors, he said quietly, out of 54 crew members. Yes, sir. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the list of names, the dead ones and the living ones. I noticed he kept scrolling back to the casualties list, reading the same names over and over. Sir, what are your orders? He blinked, like he'd forgotten I was there. Orders, right. He straightened up, trying to look like the confident commander I'd always known. But something was wrong with his eyes. They had this empty, distant look that made my skin crawl. Continue damage control efforts. See if Yuri can get any more power to life support, and keep trying to re-establish communications. Yes, sir. He turned to leave the bridge, then stopped. I need to review emergency protocols in my quarters. Check the manual for situations like this. I watched him walk away, noting how his shoulders sagged and how he seemed to be moving through thick water. The captain I knew would have been barking orders, organizing rescue efforts, finding some way to get us out of this mess. This version of him looked like a man who'd already given up. The bridge fell quiet, except for the labored wheezing of backup life support and the occasional spark from damaged consoles. I turned back to my screens, trying to coax some functionality out of the ruined communication array. We needed to send a distress signal. Someone had to know what happened here. But as I worked, I couldn't shake the image of Captain Holden's trembling hands and that hollow stare. Whatever had hit us from PX-41's surface, it had done more than just damage our ship. It had broken something inside our captain that I wasn't sure could be fixed. I found Captain Holden 3 days later when he stopped answering my calls. His quarters were locked from the inside, which should have been my first clue. I had to override the door controls with my emergency codes, and the smell hit me before I even saw him. He was slumped over his desk, a service pistol in his right hand and a small hole in his temple that looked almost too neat to be real. The note was short, handwritten on actual paper, which felt weirdly formal for something so final. I accept full responsibility for the failure of this mission and the deaths of our crew. A better commander would have found another way. The remaining survivors deserve leadership I can no longer provide. Monsieur Holden. I stood there staring at those words until my hands started shaking. The captain who'd seemed so unbreakable, who'd guided us through 3 years of deep space missions without losing a single person, had just given up. Left me holding the pieces of a situation that was way beyond anything I'd trained for. Skylar to all stations, I said into my comm, my voice sounding strange in the empty corridor. Senior staff report to the bridge immediately. Yuri showed up first, wiping grease off his hands with a rag that had seen better days. Connor and Jean arrived together, both looking exhausted from treating the injured crew members. Ellie came last, clutching a tablet full of communication logs that probably contained nothing but static. "Where's the captain?" Connor asked, glancing around the bridge. I cleared my throat. Captain Holden is dead. Suicide. As of right now, I'm assuming command. The silence stretched out until Yuri broke it with a string of Russian curses that needed no translation. Jean just closed her eyes and shook her head. Connor looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. "What's our status?" I asked, trying to sound like I knew what I was doing. Yuri pulled up a diagnostic screen that painted everything in angry red. "Life support is failing faster than I can patch it. Carbon dioxide scrubbers are running at 30% efficiency. Oxygen recyclers keep shutting down every few hours. How long do we have? With 23 people breathing, maybe 2 days before CO2 poisoning gets us." I stared at the numbers, running calculations in my head that all led to the same terrible conclusion. What if we reduce the number of people breathing? Everyone looked at me like I'd suggested murder, which I guess wasn't far off. The cryopods, I continued, quickly. How many are still functional? Connor checked his medical tablet. 18 pods are operational. The rest took damage in the blast. 18 pods, 23 survivors. The math was simple and horrible. 5 people stay awake. The rest go into suspended animation until rescue arrives. That's assuming rescue arrives, Jean said quietly. It has to. I turned to Ellie. Any response to our distress signals? She shook her head. Nothing. I've been broadcasting on every frequency, but we're too far from any shipping lanes. Even if someone picks up our signal, it could take months for help to reach us. Months. With failing life support and dwindling supplies, we didn't have months. We barely had days. We do the cryo sleep, I decided. Yuri, can you prep the pods? Duh. Will take maybe 6 hours to bring them all online and run safety checks. Connor, Jean, I need you to determine who goes under. Medical priority for anyone who's injured or might not survive the stress of staying awake. Connor nodded slowly. What about command structure? Who stays conscious to monitor systems? That was the question I'd been dreading. I stay. Yuri stays to maintain life support. Ellie stays to monitor communications. I looked around the group. 2 more volunteers. I'll stay, Connor said immediately. No. Jean put a hand on his arm. You've been working non-stop since the blast. You need rest more than any of us. She looked at me. I'll stay. Someone needs to monitor the pods and handle medical emergencies. And me, said a voice from the doorway. Petty Officer Sarah Kim stepped onto the bridge, her left arm in a sling from the blast injuries. I can help with system monitoring. I wanted to argue, to find some other solution that didn't involve putting 18 people into what might become 18 coffins if our power failed. But the numbers didn't lie. This was our only shot. All right, Yuri, start prepping the pods. Connor, work with Jean to sedate everyone safely. Ellie, keep broadcasting our position. I took a deep breath. We start in 6 hours. The next few hours passed in a blur of technical preparations and difficult conversations. I had to explain to each crew member why they were being selected for cryosleep, trying to make it sound like a medical necessity rather than a desperate gamble with their lives. Most of them understood. A few argued. All of them looked scared. Yuri worked miracles getting the cryogenic systems online with our limited power. Is not perfect, he told me as we watched the pods cycle through their startup sequences, but should keep them stable for several months if power holds. Connor and Jean moved through the crew like a well-practiced team, administering sedatives and monitoring vital signs as each person was prepared for suspension. I watched faces I'd worked with for 3 years slip into unconsciousness, wondering if I'd ever see them awake again. The hardest part was watching Yuri seal the last pod. The cryo bay fell silent, except for the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional beep from monitoring equipment. 18 pods lined the walls like high-tech coffins, each one containing someone who was trusting me to keep them alive. Power consumption is down 60%, Sarah reported from her console. Life support should be stable for the 5 of us. I nodded, trying to ignore how empty the ship felt now. The corridors that had buzzed with activity just hours ago were now silent as a tomb. Every footstep echoed. Every voice seemed too loud. I'll take first watch, I told the others. Get some rest. We're going to be doing this for a while. As the others headed to their quarters, I settled into the captain's chair on the bridge. The main screen still showed PX-41 rotating peacefully below us, looking exactly like the paradise we'd thought we were exploring. But I knew better now. That beautiful blue-green world had killed 31 of my crew and left the rest of us stranded in a dying ship. I pulled up the communication array and started composing another distress signal. The words felt hollow after weeks of sending the same message into empty space. but I kept typing anyway. Someone had to hear us. Someone had to come. The ship creaked around me, settling into its new rhythm of minimal power and failing systems. In the cryo bay, 18 people slept in artificial hibernation, trusting me to keep them alive until rescue arrived. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on my shoulders like a physical thing. I thought about Captain Holden's note about accepting responsibility for failure, but I wasn't ready to give up yet. Not while there were still people depending on me. Not while there was still a chance, however small, that someone might hear our calls for help. The distress signal transmitted into the void, carrying our coordinates and our desperate plea for rescue. I watched it disappear into the darkness between stars and started composing the next one. The emergency rations tasted like cardboard mixed with sadness, but I choked down another protein bar anyway. Week 4 of my solo watch, and I'd already burned through most of the decent food. What was left looked like it had been designed by someone who'd heard about flavor, but never actually experienced it. I made my rounds through the ship, checking systems that seemed to break down faster than I could fix them. The atmospheric recycler in Section C had started making this grinding noise that definitely wasn't in the manual. I whacked it with a wrench until it settled back into its normal wheeze. Day 28, I said into my personal recorder, my voice echoing weird in the empty corridor. Life support holding steady at 60% efficiency. Cryopods all green, still no response to distress signals. I paused the recording and rubbed my eyes. They felt gritty and sore from staring at screens for too long. Sleep had become this elusive thing that I grabbed in 20-minute chunks between system failures and paranoid checks on the pods. Something moved in my peripheral vision. I spun around, but the hallway stretched empty in both directions, just shadows from the flickering emergency lights. I'd been seeing things like that more often lately. Movement that wasn't there, shapes that dissolved when I looked directly at them. Probably just my brain trying to fill in the silence with something, anything, to break the crushing loneliness. The cryo bay hummed with the steady rhythm of 18 life support systems. I ran my daily checks on each pod, watching the green lights that meant Connor and Jean and all the others were still alive in their artificial sleep. Their faces looked peaceful behind the frosted glass, like they were just taking a nap instead of trusting me to keep them breathing. Vitals, all normal, I told the recorder. Pod 17 had a minor temperature fluctuation yesterday, but it's back in range. I think the thermal regulator is starting to wear out, but I can probably jury-rig something if it gets worse. I moved to the next pod and froze. For just a second, I could have sworn I saw Connor's eyes open behind the glass, staring right at me. But when I blinked and looked again, his face was slack and peaceful, like all the others. My hands shook as I checked his readings. Everything normal, brain activity in the expected hibernation patterns. I was losing it, seeing things that weren't there because my mind couldn't handle the isolation anymore. Back on the bridge, I pulled up the sensor readings from PX-41. The planet rotated below us like nothing had happened, all blue oceans and white clouds and green continents that looked exactly like home. But I knew better now. Something down there had reached up and swatted us out of the sky like we were annoying insects. The energy readings from that day still made no sense to me. Dr. Richter would have understood them, but Dr. Richter was dead, and I was just a navigation officer trying to make sense of physics that was way above my pay grade. The numbers showed massive power spikes that came from nowhere and went nowhere, like reality had hiccuped for a few seconds. Personal log, day 28. I continued recording. I keep thinking about what Dr. Richter said right before they died. This world is not yours. Like he figured something out in those last seconds. Like he understood what was happening to them. I stared at the planet's surface, trying to spot any signs of the structures the ground team had found. But from orbit, everything looked normal. Peaceful. The kind of world you'd want to retire to if you didn't know it was full of invisible killers. A voice called my name from somewhere behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly fell out of my chair. The bridge was empty. Just me and the soft hum of failing electronics and the distant wheeze of life support. But I could have sworn someone had said Skylar clear as day, like they were standing right next to me. "Hello?" I called out, feeling stupid even as I did it. "Anyone there?" Silence. Of course there was silence. There were only 5 conscious people left on the ship, and the other 4 were in their quarters trying to grab some sleep while they could. I was hearing things now, on top of seeing things. Great. I went back to the sensor logs, scrolling through weeks of data that all showed the same thing: a beautiful, deadly world that had killed my friends and left the rest of us stranded. The atmospheric readings looked normal. The electromagnetic spectrum looked normal. Everything looked normal except for those few minutes when reality had apparently decided to take a coffee break. The communication array beeped, and for a wild second my heart jumped. But it was just the automated distress signal cycling through another broadcast. Same message I'd been sending for weeks, transmitted into empty space with the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, might hear it and care enough to help. I pulled up the message and read it again, even though I'd memorized every word. UNSC Argo requesting immediate assistance. Catastrophic system failure. 31 crew KIA. 18 survivors in cryogenic suspension. Life support failing. Position follows. Please respond. Short and to the point. No mention of invisible attackers or energy weapons or the growing certainty that we'd stumbled into something way bigger and more dangerous than a simple exploration mission. Who would believe that, anyway? My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen when I switched it off. I barely recognized the guy looking back. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under bloodshot eyes, hair that stuck up in random directions because I'd stopped caring about military grooming standards. I looked like someone who'd been living in a cave for months instead of weeks. The protein bar sat heavy in my stomach as I made another circuit of the ship. More flickering lights in Section D. The water recycler making a new grinding sound that probably meant expensive parts were wearing out. The backup generator running hot because the primary power grid was still fried from that energy blast. I fixed what I could and made notes about what I couldn't. The list of broken things kept getting longer while the list of spare parts kept getting shorter. We were living on borrowed time, held together by duct tape and desperate improvisation. Day 28, supplemental, I said into the recorder as I crawled out from under a malfunctioning air scrubber. Starting to think rescue isn't coming. Long-range communications are still down, and even if someone picked up our distress signal, we're so far off the shipping lanes that it could take months for help to reach us. I paused, listening to the ship creak around me. Sometimes I imagined I could hear voices in those sounds, conversations from when the corridors were full of people instead of ghosts and shadows. I keep having these dreams, I continued, about other places, other worlds that look like Earth but aren't quite right. Different continents, different stars, different people. Probably just my brain trying to process what happened down there, but they feel so real, like I'm actually visiting these places instead of just dreaming about them. The dreams had started a few days ago. Vivid, detailed visions of worlds that were almost familiar but wrong in subtle ways. Cities where the buildings were the wrong shape. Skies where the sun was the wrong color. People who looked human but moved in ways that made my skin crawl. I shook my head and kept walking. Stress dreams, that's all. My mind was cracking under the pressure of keeping everyone alive while slowly starving and going crazy from isolation. The human brain wasn't designed for this kind of solitary confinement. Back in the cryo bay, I ran another check on the pods. All green lights, all stable readings. Connor and Jean and Yuri and the others sleeping peacefully while I held down the fort. They trusted me to keep them alive until rescue came, and I wasn't going to let them down. Even if rescue never came. Even if we were all going to die out here in the dark between stars, forgotten and alone. I touched the glass of Connor's pod and whispered, "Hang in there, buddy. Someone's going to hear us. Someone's going to come." But as I said the words, I caught movement in the reflection on the glass. A figure standing behind me that wasn't there when I turned around. Just empty space, and the soft hum of life support systems keeping 18 people alive in their artificial sleep. I was losing my mind, piece by piece, day by day. But I was still breathing, and they were still breathing. And somewhere out there, in the vast emptiness of space, maybe someone was listening to our desperate calls for help. I had to believe that. Because if I stopped believing, if I gave up like Captain Holden had given up, then we were all dead anyway. The distress signal transmitted again, carrying our coordinates and our hope into the void. I watched it disappear into the darkness and started composing the next one. The proximity alarm jolted me awake from another restless nap at my station. I'd been dreaming about Connor again, his eyes opening behind the cryopod glass, trying to tell me something important. But the insistent beeping dragged me back to reality, and I scrambled to check the sensors. A massive ship hung in space about 50,000 kilometers out, easily 10 times the size of the Argo. My hands shook as I pulled up the scanner readings, hardly believing what I was seeing. The hull configuration looked familiar, UNSC design, but bigger than any vessel I'd seen in the fleet. Unknown vessel. This is Lieutenant Skylar Patterson aboard the UNSC Argo, I transmitted, my voice cracking with exhaustion and desperate hope. We are in critical need of assistance. Please respond. Static filled the channel for what felt like forever. Then a crisp, professional voice came through the speakers. UNSC Argo. This is Commander David Stark aboard the UNSC Retribution. We received your distress signals and are responding to provide assistance. Request permission to dock for rescue operations. I nearly collapsed with relief. Someone had heard us. Someone had come. After weeks of broadcasting into empty space, convinced we were going to die alone and forgotten, actual help had arrived. Permission granted, Commander Stark. We have 18 crew members in cryogenic suspension and 5 conscious survivors. Our life support is failing, and we need immediate evacuation. Understood, Argo. We're moving to docking position now. Prepare your crew for transfer. I ran through the ship like a crazy person, checking systems and making sure everything was ready. The cryopods all showed green lights. Connor, Jean, Yuri, and the others still stable in their artificial sleep. I activated the main airlock and powered up what was left of our docking systems. Through the porthole, I watched the Retribution maneuver closer. The ship was beautiful in a brutal sort of way, all sharp angles and heavy armor plating. Their docking tube extended toward us with mechanical precision, and I heard the satisfying clank of a successful connection. The airlock cycled, and Commander Stark stepped through with a team of 6 soldiers. He was tall and imposing, with steel gray hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. His uniform was UNSC standard, but somehow different. The blue was darker, almost black, and the insignia weren't quite right. Lieutenant Patterson. His voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. Yes, sir. Thank you for responding to our distress call. I wasn't sure anyone would hear us out here. Stark nodded curtly. We monitor these sectors for exactly this type of emergency. What's your status? I launched into the whole horrible story. The ground team's mysterious deaths, the energy attack from PX-41, Captain Holden's suicide, the decision to put most of the crew into cryosleep. Stark listened without interruption, his expression never changing. His soldiers spread out through the ship, supposedly checking systems and preparing for evacuation. The survivors are in the cryo bay, I said, leading him down the corridor. 18 pods, all stable. They've been under for about 3 weeks now. Show me. The cryo bay hummed with its familiar rhythm of life support systems. 18 pods lined the walls, each one containing someone who'd trusted me to keep them alive until rescue arrived. I felt a surge of pride that I'd actually managed it. They were all still breathing, still stable, ready to be transferred to the Retribution's medical facilities. Vitals are good across the board, I said, pulling up the monitoring display. Connor Blake, our chief medic, is in Pod 7. Jean Martinez, his assistant, is in Pod 12. Yuri Volkov, our chief engineer, is in Pod 3. Stark walked along the row of pods, studying each face behind the frosted glass. His soldiers took positions around the room, and something about their stance made me uneasy. They weren't acting like rescue personnel. They were acting like guards. "Sir, when can we start the revival process? I know cryogenic awakening takes time, but there won't be a revival process." I turned to stare at him. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, Stark pulled a sidearm from his holster. The soldiers did the same, raising their weapons with practiced efficiency. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. "What are you doing?" Stark aimed his weapon at Connor's pod. "Eliminating contamination." The shot was impossibly loud in the enclosed space. The pod's glass shattered, and Connor's peaceful expression disappeared in a spray of blood and cryogenic fluid. I screamed and lunged forward, but two soldiers grabbed my arms and held me back. "No! What are you doing? Stop!" But they didn't stop. Stark moved to the next pod, John's pod, and fired again. More glass, more blood, more death. The soldiers worked their way down the line with mechanical precision, executing helpless people who couldn't even wake up to defend themselves. "Please." I fought against the hands holding me, tears streaming down my face. "They're innocent. They don't know anything." Yuri's pod exploded in a shower of sparks and fluid. Then Sarah Kim's, then Rodriguez's. One by one, my crew, people who'd trusted me to protect them, were murdered in their sleep. "Why are you doing this?" I sobbed, watching the massacre continue. "We're UNSC. We're on the same side." Stark paused in his systematic execution and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "No, Lieutenant, we're not." The last pod shattered. 18 people dead in less than 2 minutes. The cryo bay floor was slick with blood and cryogenic fluid, and the air reeked of ozone and death. I stopped struggling and just hung there between the soldiers, staring at the carnage. "Secure the prisoner," Stark ordered, holstering his weapon. "Prepare him for transport." "Prisoner?" The word came out as a whisper. "I don't understand. We called for help. You're supposed to rescue us." "You're being rescued, Lieutenant, from a situation you never should have been in." Stark's voice was calm, professional, like he'd just completed routine maintenance instead of mass murder. "Your mission violated several interdimensional treaties. The consequences were always going to be severe." Interdimensional treaties? The words made no sense. Nothing made sense. I'd watched 18 people die for reasons I couldn't begin to understand, killed by people wearing uniforms that looked like mine, but weren't quite right. The soldiers dragged me toward the airlock, my boots slipping in the blood of my friends. Behind us, the cryo bay fell silent except for the sparking of damaged equipment and the drip of fluid from shattered pods. "Connor," I whispered, looking back at what was left of the man who'd patched up every injury, who'd worked himself to exhaustion trying to save people after the energy blast. "Jean, Yuri." All dead, all murdered by the people I'd thought were coming to save us. As they hauled me through the airlock onto the Retribution, I caught a glimpse of PX-41 through a porthole. The planet rotated peacefully below us, blue and green and beautiful, hiding whatever secrets had started this nightmare. I'd kept my promise to the crew. I'd kept them alive until rescue arrived. I just hadn't known that rescue would come with guns. The restraints cut into my wrists as I tried to process what had just happened. The chair was bolted to the floor in what looked like a medical examination room. White walls, bright lights, the kind of sterile environment that made everything feel cold and wrong. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Commander Stark stood against the far wall, arms crossed, watching me like I was some kind of dangerous animal. The woman who'd entered with him pulled up a chair across from me and sat down with the casual confidence of someone completely in control. "I'm Director Iris Wong," she said, setting a tablet on the small table between us. "I need to ask you some questions about your mission." "Questions?" The word came out louder than I intended. "You just murdered 18 people in their sleep and you want to ask me questions?" Wong's expression didn't change. She had sharp, intelligent eyes behind thin glasses, and her black uniform bore scientific insignia instead of military ones. Everything about her suggested someone who dealt in facts and data rather than emotions. "Those people were already dead, Lieutenant Patterson. We simply prevented further contamination." Contamination? They were in cryosleep. They were unconscious. "Tell me about PX-41, she continued, ignoring my outburst. "What were your mission parameters?" I stared at her, trying to understand how someone could sit there so calmly after what I'd just witnessed. "I'm not telling you anything until you explain why you killed my crew." Stark pushed off from the wall. "You're not in a position to make demands." "The hell I'm not. You're wearing UNSC uniforms. You claim to be rescue personnel, but you just committed mass murder. I want to know who you really are and why." "We are UNSC," Wong interrupted. "The question is whether you are." She activated her tablet and turned it toward me. The screen showed what looked like official documentation, mission reports, personnel files, technical specifications. But the details were wrong. Ship classifications I'd never heard of. Command structures that didn't match anything I knew. Dates that made no sense. "Your vessel, the Argo, appears in none of our fleet registries," Wong said. "Your crew members have no service records in our databases. Your mission to PX-41 was unauthorized and violated several interdimensional treaties." "Interdimensional what?" I leaned forward as much as the restraints allowed. "What are you talking about?" Wong studied me for a long moment like she was trying to decide something. "PX-41 is designated as Earth Prime in our records. It's a protected world under our jurisdiction." "Earth Prime? That's impossible. PX-41 is an unexplored planet in the Kepler system. We were the first human mission to trespass on sovereign territory." Stark cut in. "Your ground team violated dimensional barriers that have been in place for decades." My brain felt like it was short-circuiting. Nothing they were saying made any sense, but they spoke with the certainty of people stating obvious facts. Dimensional barriers? What the hell does that even mean? Wong pulled up another file on her tablet. "Multiple versions of Earth exist across dimensional boundaries, Lieutenant. Unauthorized crossings between these realities threaten the stability of all parallel worlds." I stared at the screen, trying to process words that sounded like science fiction. "You're saying PX-41 is another Earth?" "Earth Prime, to be precise. The inhabitants evolved differently than your baseline humanity. They developed the ability to phase between dimensional layers, which is why your sensors couldn't detect them. The invisible attackers, the way they'd appeared from nowhere and dragged the ground team away." Dr. Richter's final words. "This world is not yours." "The energy blast that destroyed your ship," Stark added, "was a defensive response. Earth Prime's population perceived your arrival as an invasion." "An invasion?" My voice cracked. "We were explorers. We were trying to make contact, to learn." "You were trespassing," Wong said firmly. "Your crew violated protected space and triggered defensive protocols that resulted in multiple casualties." I thought about the ground team's final moments, Ramirez screaming about invisible attackers, Dr. Hansen's panicked breathing, the way their biomonitors had spiked and flatlined in seconds. They'd died terrified and confused, not understanding what was happening to them. "They didn't know," I whispered. "We had no idea there were people down there. Our scans showed no life signs, no civilization." "Because Earth Prime's inhabitants exist partially outside your dimensional framework," Wong explained. "Your technology couldn't detect them any more than they could initially detect you." The room felt like it was spinning. Everything I thought I knew about the mission, about exploration, about humanity's place in the universe was crumbling around me. If there are multiple Earths, why didn't anyone tell us? Why aren't there protocols, treaties, communication? There are, Stark said. Your UNSC apparently operates outside those agreements. Wong leaned forward, her voice taking on a clinical tone. How many missions like yours has your organization launched? How many other dimensional boundaries have you crossed without authorization? I don't know what you're talking about. We explore uninhabited worlds. We look for resources and potential colonies. That's what the UNSC does. Your UNSC, Wong corrected. Not ours. The implications hit me like a physical blow. These people weren't just from a different ship or a different command structure. They were from a completely different reality, one where humanity had developed along different lines and made contact with parallel versions of Earth. You're not from my universe, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. No, Wong confirmed. And you're not from ours, which creates a significant problem. Stark moved closer to my chair. Dozens of missions like yours have crossed dimensional lines in the past 5 years. Each incursion destabilizes the barriers between realities. We've had to establish monitoring stations and intervention protocols, Wong added. Your crew's deaths were unfortunate but necessary to prevent larger catastrophes. I thought about Connor's peaceful face behind the cryopod glass, the way he'd looked like he was just sleeping. Jean's steady hands that had saved so many lives. Yuri's quiet competence that had kept us alive for weeks. All of them murdered because they'd unknowingly crossed some invisible line between worlds. They were innocent, I said, tears burning my eyes. They didn't know about any of this. Ignorance doesn't negate consequences, Wong replied. Your reality's expansion into dimensional space threatens the stability of multiple Earths. We can't allow that contamination to spread. So what happens to me? Wong and Stark exchanged a look. You'll remain here as evidence of your reality's violations. Proof that unauthorized dimensional travel has consequences. You mean I can never go home? There is no home for you to return to, Stark said. Your reality has been quarantined. No further crossings will be permitted. The restraints suddenly felt tighter, the room smaller. I was trapped, not just on this ship, but in an entire universe that wasn't mine, surrounded by people who looked human, but operated by rules I'd never imagined existed. The energy blast, I said, grasping for something that made sense. It was so precise. It destroyed our engines and life support, but left just enough power to keep us alive. Earth Prime's inhabitants are more sophisticated than your people realized, Wong explained. They wanted survivors to serve as a warning. Unfortunately, your distress signals attracted our attention before you could die naturally. You were supposed to let us die? It would have been cleaner, Stark admitted, but we needed intelligence about your reality's capabilities and intentions. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the sterile room and the casual way they discussed my crew's deaths, but I could still see Connor's face exploding in a spray of blood and cryogenic fluid, still hear the sound of shattering glass as 18 people died in their sleep. Dr. Richter figured it out, I said quietly. In those last seconds, he understood what was happening. That's why he said the world wasn't ours. Wong made a note on her tablet. Your physicist showed promising intuition. It's unfortunate he didn't survive to share his insights. He was a good man. They all were. Good intentions don't matter when you're violating fundamental laws of dimensional physics, Stark said. Your reality's ignorance has consequences that extend far beyond your own universe. The weight of it all pressed down on me like a physical force. My crew was dead. My ship was destroyed. My entire reality was apparently some kind of rogue faction stumbling blindly through dimensional space, causing damage I couldn't even comprehend. And I was stuck here forever, the sole survivor of a mission that should never have happened, in a universe that would never be home. Wong stood up, closing her tablet. We'll continue this conversation later. You need time to process what you've learned. Wait, I called as she headed for the door. The people on Earth Prime, are they human? She paused. They're what humanity became when it evolved along different lines. Dimensional phase shifting, collective consciousness, technologies your people can't imagine. They're as human as you are, Lieutenant. They're just better at it. The door sealed behind them with a soft hiss, leaving me alone with the restraints and the terrible knowledge that everything I'd believed about exploration and discovery had been a lie. We weren't brave pioneers pushing into the unknown. We were dimensional terrorists, stumbling through realities we didn't understand, leaving destruction in our wake. And somewhere out there, PX-41 continued its peaceful rotation, home to humans who'd learned to exist between worlds while my people had learned only to destroy them. The questions kept coming, each one making less sense than the last. Wong sat across from me with that same clinical expression, like she was studying a particularly interesting lab specimen. Your UNSC operates approximately 47 vessels in deep space exploration, she said, reading from her tablet. How many of those missions have encountered what you would classify as unexplained phenomena? I don't know. I'm a navigation officer, not fleet command. My voice sounded hollow even to me. Why does it matter? Because every unexplained phenomenon represents a potential dimensional incursion. She made another note. Energy readings that don't match known physics. Sensor ghosts that appear and disappear. Communication dead zones in empty space. I thought about the mission briefings I'd sat through over the years. The Meridian expedition that lost contact for 6 hours before reappearing with no memory of the gap. The Kepler 442 survey that reported their instruments malfunctioning near what looked like empty space. Dozens of little mysteries that got filed away as equipment failures or cosmic anomalies. You're saying those weren't equipment failures? Your people have been blundering through dimensional barriers for years, Stark said from his position by the wall. Each crossing destabilizes the boundaries between realities. Wong pulled up a new display on her tablet, some kind of three-dimensional map with interconnected nodes and flowing lines. 47 parallel Earths exist within detectable range, each one developed differently. Some achieved faster than light travel. Others focused on dimensional manipulation. A few never left their home systems. The map looked like a spiderweb made of light, with each node pulsing at different rates. Lines connected them in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Earth Prime, your PX-41, represents one of the most advanced civilizations in the network, she continued. They've existed in dimensional phase space for over 3 centuries. Phase space? Existing between dimensional layers. They can step sideways through reality, observe other worlds without being detected, defend their territory from incursions. Wong's finger traced one of the brighter nodes. Your ground team walked into their backyard without permission. I remembered Dr. Hansen's excitement about the crystalline formations, the way they pulsed with internal light. Dr. Richter's readings that didn't match any known energy signatures. We'd thought we were discovering alien technology, but we'd actually been stumbling around someone's home. The energy blast that hit the Argo, I said slowly. It was surgical. It destroyed our engines and life support, but left just enough power to keep us alive. Earth Prime's inhabitants wanted survivors, Stark confirmed. Someone to carry a message back to your reality. Stop sending ships into protected space. But we never got the message. We just died out there. Wong nodded. Which is why we had to intervene. Your distress signals were broadcasting across multiple dimensional frequencies. Other realities were starting to take notice. The room felt smaller with each revelation. Everything I'd believed about humanity's expansion into space, our noble mission to explore and discover, was crumbling into something ugly and ignorant. How many missions like ours have you stopped? 17 in the past 2 years, Stark said. Your UNSC has been particularly aggressive in pushing into protected territories. We didn't know they were protected. We thought they were uninhabited worlds. Ignorance isn't an excuse when you're violating fundamental laws of dimensional physics. Wong's voice stayed level, professional. Your reality's expansion threatens the stability of the entire network. She showed me another display, the same web-like map, but now some of the connections were flickering red, stress fractures spreading between the nodes like cracks in glass. Each unauthorized crossing weakens the barriers between realities. Too many incursions and the whole system could collapse, merging dozens of Earths into a single, catastrophically unstable space. I stared at the red line spreading across the map. How many people would die? Billions, across multiple realities. Wong closed the display, which is why we established monitoring protocols and intervention procedures. You mean murder? We mean containment. Stark moved closer to my chair. Your crew's deaths prevented a larger catastrophe. The casual way he said it made my stomach turn. Connor, Jean, Yuri, all of them reduced to acceptable casualties in some cosmic equation I'd never known existed. What about my Earth? My reality? Wong and Stark exchanged another look. Quarantined, she said finally. No further dimensional crossings will be permitted. Your UNSC's exploration program has been discontinued. Discontinued how? The same way your mission was discontinued, Stark said. Permanently. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Not just my crew, not just the Argo, but every ship, every mission, every person who'd ever believed in humanity's expansion into the stars. All of it ended by people from parallel realities who decided we were too dangerous to exist. You destroyed my entire civilization. We prevented your civilization from destroying 46 others, Wong corrected. The mathematics are quite clear. I pulled against the restraints, rage building in my chest. You had no right. We could have learned, we could have followed your rules if someone had just told us. Your people had multiple opportunities to recognize the signs, Stark interrupted. The unexplained phenomena, the equipment failures, the missing time. You chose to ignore them and push deeper into protected space, because we didn't know what they meant. Willful ignorance, Wong said, making another note. Your species prioritizes expansion over understanding. It's a dangerous combination when dealing with dimensional physics. The room went quiet except for the hum of ventilation and the soft beeping of whatever monitoring equipment they had running. I thought about Earth, about the billions of people who'd gone to sleep thinking they lived in a universe where humanity was alone, where exploration meant discovering empty worlds waiting to be claimed. How long have you known about the other Earths? Our reality made contact with the dimensional network 87 years ago, Wong said. We learned the rules, established diplomatic relations, earned our place in the community. And you've been watching us break those rules ever since. Monitoring, yes. Intervention was always a last resort. She stood up, smoothing down her uniform. Your reality forced our hand. Stark moved toward the door. The questioning is complete for now. You'll be transferred to a detention facility while we determine your final disposition. Final disposition. The words came out as a whisper. Your evidence, Wong explained. Proof that unauthorized dimensional travel has consequences. Other realities need to see what happens to civilizations that refuse to follow the rules. 2 guards entered the room, their uniforms bearing the same wrong but familiar insignia I'd noticed on Stark's clothing. They released my restraints and hauled me to my feet, my legs shaking from sitting in the same position for hours. Wait, I called as Wong headed for the door. The people on Earth Prime. When they killed my ground team, did they know that we were just explorers who didn't understand? She paused, her hand on the door frame. They knew exactly what you were, Lieutenant. Dimensional terrorists who'd stumbled into their territory without permission. Your intentions were irrelevant. The guards dragged me toward the corridor, my boots sliding on the polished floor. Behind us, the interrogation room fell silent, leaving only the weight of everything I'd learned pressing down on my shoulders. We weren't explorers. We weren't pioneers pushing into the unknown for the betterment of humanity. We were cosmic vandals, smashing through barriers we couldn't see, threatening realities we'd never imagined existed. And now I was the last one left to carry that knowledge, trapped forever in a universe that would never be home, surrounded by people who looked human but operated by rules that made my entire species obsolete. The corridor stretched ahead of us, sterile and endless, leading toward a detention cell where I'd spend the rest of my life as a monument to humanity's ignorance. Behind us, the interrogation room door sealed shut with a soft hiss, cutting off the last connection to everything I'd thought I understood about the universe. Reality had layers my people had never dreamed of, and our noble mission of exploration had been dimensional terrorism all along.